They laughed when I told them where I worked. A small repair shop on the edge of town, where the scent of oil was stronger than any perfume and my hands were never clean enough for their tables. They wore tailored suits and shiny watches, the kind that tick louder when you're insecure. They used to call me the mechanic with a degree, like ambition was a punchline. I stayed quiet, tightening bolts while they loosened their morals climbing corporate ladders. Years passed. The shop grew. My name became a brand, my tools turned digital, and my hands built more than engines. They built an empire. The same people who once looked down on me now shake my hand in boardrooms they used to own. And their CEO, the man who laughed the loudest, now signs paychecks with my company's logo in the corner. The first time they laughed, it was in the break room of a downtown office where I'd once interned. I just told them I was leaving my position, a promising junior analyst job, to start something on my own. Not a tech company, not a glamorous startup, just a small auto repair business with my uncle on the edge of town. The silence lasted half a second before the laughter started. One guy nearly spilled his coffee. Another said, "Wait, you went to business school for that?" I smiled because I didn't have the vocabulary for pride yet, not the kind that doesn't need to defend itself. They had their tailored suits, their big city ambitions, and their Friday night cocktails at rooftop bars. I had a pair of grease-stained hands and a 15-year-old toolbox. But I also had something they didn't, a reason. Because where they saw dirty work, I saw potential. The world runs on what people undervalue. And I was about to turn that into my greatest advantage. The repair shop wasn't much when I took over. 2 cracked windows, 1 leaking roof, and a reputation that barely stretched beyond the block. But there was something honest about the smell of oil and metal. Something real about fixing what was broken with your own hands. I didn't have investors. I had invoices. I didn't have a marketing team. I had word of mouth. And every night, when the others turned off their lights and went home, I stayed late, fixing, painting, planning. The first 6 months were brutal. Bills piled up. My savings ran dry. There were nights I sat on the cold floor, staring at the same broken carburetor, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But then something shifted. A man in a suit stopped by one morning. His BMW had broken down halfway across the highway. "I'll pay whatever it takes," he said, frustrated. "Just fix it fast." I fixed it in 3 hours flat. He left me a 5-star review online. Then another customer came. Then 5. Then 50. By the end of that year, I'd hired 2 more mechanics. By the second year, I had 3 shops. And by the third, something unexpected happened. I started getting calls not from drivers, but from companies. Fleet services. Delivery businesses. They didn't want just repairs. They wanted management, maintenance systems, diagnostics, efficiency tracking. So I built it. A small software coded in the back office between oil changes that could predict and schedule vehicle maintenance automatically. I called it Torque IQ because intelligence like power should move things forward. While I was building, the world was watching something else. The fall of big corporations too busy scaling to care about service. One by one, small businesses like mine started catching their clients. I was too busy fixing to celebrate, but one day, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Aaron, one of the guys from that break room years ago. He'd been promoted to a director role at a logistics company, a name I'd only seen on the side of trucks. "Hey, Ethan, we're looking to modernize our fleet operations. You still doing your car thing?" "My car thing." I smiled. A week later, I walked into their glass building, the same one I used to take the elevator in as an intern. The receptionist didn't recognize me, and that was fine. Aaron met me in the lobby, looking exactly the same, except now his confidence looked tired. "So, Torque IQ." "Huh," he said, trying to sound casual. "Never thought you'd stick with a mechanic gig this long." "I didn't," I replied. "I built something from it." He smirked. "Let's see if it works." It did. Within months, our system had reduced their vehicle downtime by 40%. Their CEO called it the smartest investment of a year. They offered me a full partnership. I declined politely. I didn't want to work for them. I wanted to replace them, so I kept building. By the 5th year, Torque IQ wasn't a repair software anymore. It was an ecosystem, predictive analytics, AI diagnostics, remote monitoring. We weren't just fixing cars. We were revolutionizing how entire fleets moved. When investors finally came knocking, I didn't need them. But I took their meetings anyway, because every no I'd ever heard was now an asset I could measure market value. One day, during a tech conference, a familiar name flashed on the partnership list. Vanguard Mobility Solutions, the same company where Aaron now worked. The same company whose CEO once called small businesses the lazy man's dream. They didn't recognize me right away. But when our companies shared the same stage and the host introduced me as the founder and CEO of Torque IQ Technologies, now acquiring Vanguard Mobility, I caught Aaron's expression in the front row. Shock, then disbelief, then something that almost looked like respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because revenge doesn't always need a roar. Sometimes it's a handshake in a boardroom. By the end of that year, Torque IQ became the parent company of Vanguard Mobility. And the man who once laughed at me over coffee, he now worked under a CEO he once dismissed as the mechanic with a degree. When I saw him at the first executive meeting, he couldn't even meet my eyes. So I made it easy for him. Aaron, I said calmly, it's good to see you again. You still think I should have stayed in finance? He hesitated, then gave a small, humble laugh. You made the right call, boss. That word, boss, didn't feel like victory. It felt like validation. Because they'd laughed at my job, but I'd built one that built others. And that, more than any revenge, was the real success. When the headlines hit, Torque IQ acquires Vanguard Mobility in landmark deal, I didn't feel the rush people expected. No champagne, no late-night celebration, just silence. I sat alone in my office that night, the glow of the city lights flickering against the window. I remember the first time I'd walked into that same building years ago, and in turn with secondhand shoes and big dreams. Now I owned it, and yet success felt heavier than I'd imagined, because it wasn't just about being on top, it was about staying there. The acquisition had changed everything. Overnight, my small, tight-knit company became a corporate giant. We had departments, divisions, and people I'd never met sending me reports full of words that said nothing. The media loved the story, the mechanic who outsmarted the market. But behind the spotlight, I could feel the cracks forming. Some of the old Vanguard executives didn't like answering to me, especially those who once laughed at the idea of a blue-collar CEO. They smiled in meetings, but their eyes were sharp with resistance. I had to learn fast. Running a shop and running an empire were two different kinds of pressure. A mistake in a workshop costs you an hour. A mistake in a merger costs you everything. It started with a small breach, a data leak that almost exposed our proprietary AI models. When my CTO rushed into my office that night, pale and trembling, I realized this wasn't a random hack. It was internal. Someone from the old guard had tried to sabotage us. I didn't explode. I didn't panic. Instead, I pulled out my old habit from the shop days. Fix the system first, ask questions later. Within 24 hours, we traced the breach to one of the senior executives who'd been part of Vanguard before the acquisition. He'd been secretly sharing confidential documents with a rival firm, the same company that used to mock our garage-born origins. I fired him the next morning. No theatrics, no warnings, just a calm signature at the bottom of the termination letter. The board was stunned. That man's been here 20 years, one of them protested. Then he should have known better, I said. That was the first time they saw what kind of leader I was. Not the mechanic they remembered, not the dreamer they dismissed, but the man who understood how to rebuild trust by removing the rot. Over the next few months, I made changes. I built what I called the Integrity Board, a council of employees from every level, from interns to directors. No titles, no hierarchies. Once a month, we met to discuss what was working and what wasn't, that it was unorthodox. It was uncomfortable, but it worked, because when people have a voice, they protect what they build. One afternoon, during one of those meetings, a young woman named Sophia spoke up. She'd been a junior data analyst barely out of college. I think we're focusing too much on big contracts, she said nervously. Small businesses like the ones you came from, they can't afford our systems anymore. Her words hit me like a mirror. She was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd become the very thing I used to fight against, a man who forgot the ground he grew from. After the meeting, I called her into my office. You were honest in there, I told her. Don't lose that. You're coming with me to the next board review. She blinked wide-eyed. Sir, I'm just an analyst. Not anymore, I said. You're the future. That decision would change everything. Under Sophia's guidance, we launched a new initiative, TorqueLite, a stripped-down version of our tech built specifically for small auto repair shops and local businesses. The same kind of places I used to sweep floors in. The idea exploded. Within 6 months, TorqueLite was being used in over 10,000 garages across the country. The reviews poured in, mechanics, fleet owners, even single-vehicle drivers thanking us for bringing technology back to the people. That project didn't just grow our revenue. It restored our identity. Because sometimes to move forward, you have to look back at where your roots still hold the ground. But not everyone was happy. The corporate investors wanted bigger clients, not smaller ones. They called TorqueLite a distraction and accused me of playing charity instead of strategy. One board member even said, "You're running this company like a passion project, Ethan. You need to think like an executive." I leaned back in my chair, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "I built this company with a wrench, not a resume. Don't mistake heart for weakness." He didn't argue again. Success returned, in waves this time. Our expansion went global. Offices in Singapore, Berlin, and Toronto. Our valuation crossed $1 billion, but numbers stopped meaning much to me. What mattered was purpose. Then came the phone call that would remind me just how far I'd come. It was from a familiar voice, Robert Haynes, the CEO of one of the biggest corporations in logistics, and coincidentally, the man who had once interviewed me for an internship I never got. He'd smirked at my resume back then, said, "Mechanical engineering and business? Pick one. You can't be both." Now his tone was polite, respectful, almost nervous. "Ethan, I've been following Torque IQ for a while," he said. "We're looking to license your software across our global fleet. Let's talk partnership." Partnership. The word tasted poetic. The next week, I flew to New York for the meeting. The same skyscraper where I'd once waited in the lobby for that failed internship interview now had my name on the guest list. Ethan Cole, CEO, Torque IQ Technologies. When I walked into the boardroom, Robert was there, older now, but with the same sharp eyes. He shook my hand and said, "You've built quite an empire. I underestimated you." I smiled. "You in half the city, sir." The meeting went smoothly. Numbers, licensing, percentages. But before leaving, I couldn't resist asking, "By the way, who's running your operations now?" He hesitated, then said, "A man named Aaron Richards. Used to be with Vanguard, I believe. Solid worker, sharp mind." I couldn't help but grin. Aaron, the man who'd once mocked my grease-stained hands, was now running logistics for my client. Full circle. That night, back in my hotel room, I stood on the balcony overlooking the skyline. The same city that once laughed at me. The same streets where people said I'd never make it past the workshop gates. I raised a glass, not to revenge, not to victory, but to the quiet satisfaction of having turned every insult into ignition. Because they didn't just laugh at my job, they laughed at my dream. And dreams, I'd learned, have the loudest engines of all. Success, I learned, doesn't destroy you, comfort does. It creeps in quietly, disguised as accomplishment, whispering that you've already done enough. And when you start listening, that's when you begin to lose everything you built. For me, that moment came disguised as trust. It was almost midnight when I got the call from our head of finance, Darren, a man I'd known since my first repair shop days. He'd been there when Torque IQ was just an idea scribbled on napkins. He'd invested the first $1,000 when no one else believed. "Ethan, we need to talk." His voice trembled. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "It's about Sophia." My chest tightened. "What about her?" "She's been accessing confidential accounts. Offshore transfers linked to our new subsidiary in Dubai." I froze. Sophia? The same woman who helped rebuild Torque IQ's purpose? The one who believed in helping small businesses? No, it didn't make sense. "There has to be a mistake," I said. "I hope so," Darren replied quietly. "But if not, we've got a problem that money can't fix." I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I called in the cybersecurity team. We combed through logs, transfers, communications, everything. The results came back within hours. There it was, in plain data, unauthorized wire transactions, each small enough to go unnoticed, each linked to shell accounts. And yes, all traced back to Sophia's credentials. My stomach sank, not because of the betrayal, but because of what it meant. I had vouched for her, promoted her, believed in her voice when no one else did. If she had really sold us out, then I hadn't just failed as a leader. I'd failed as a believer in people. I called her into my office that evening. She walked in with that same steady confidence I'd admired since the first day she spoke up. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Sit down." The silence stretched. I turned my screen toward her, bank logs, timestamps, transfers. Her face didn't change, not even a flicker. "I don't know what this is," she said firmly. "But it's not me." I studied her. "These accounts are tied to your login, Sophia. Your ID, your device." "Then someone's framing me," she said quickly. "Ethan, you know me." And I wanted to, God, I wanted to. But every CEO has a moment when emotion and evidence pull in opposite directions. Mine had arrived. That night, I reviewed everything again alone. The security team confirmed her login activity matched the transaction times. No signs of external access. On paper, she was guilty. I drafted the termination letter 3 times. Each time I deleted it. The next morning, I signed it. When she came into my office and saw the envelope on my desk, her eyes dimmed. "I guess it's easier to believe the numbers than the person," she said softly. I didn't respond. I couldn't. As she left, she turned back and added, "One day, you'll realize what you really lost today." The door closed, and the office felt emptier than it ever had. Weeks passed. Work continued. The board applauded my decisive leadership. But something felt off. Torque IQ was running perfectly, yet it didn't feel alive anymore. The press loved the image of the unshakable CEO who made the hard calls. But I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow. Darren noticed it, too. "You're doing the right thing," he said one evening, trying to reassure me. "You can't save everyone." I nodded, but something in his tone lingered, a quiet unease I couldn't name. Until one night, when a message popped up on my screen. Anonymous. No name. Just a subject line. "You fired the wrong person." Attached were encrypted files, transaction logs, internal messages, and surveillance footage from the Dubai office. I clicked play. There, on the grainy feed, wasn't Sophia. It was Darren. The footage showed him accessing her workstation late at night, using her credentials, transferring funds to offshore accounts. He'd been using her as cover, the one person no one would suspect, the one person I trusted the most. My chest went cold. Every defense mechanism I'd built as a leader, logic, skepticism, caution, collapsed into one burning realization. I'd been played. The next day, I called Darren into the office. He smiled as he walked in, the same way he always did when he thought he had me fooled. "What's up, boss?" "Close the door," I said quietly. He obeyed, still smirking. "Something wrong." I turned the laptop toward him, paused on the frame where his face was clear as day. The smirk vanished. He tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "I trusted you when no one else did," I said, voice steady. "You didn't just steal money, Darren. You stole belief. And that's something you'll never afford to buy back." Security escorted him out within minutes. No drama, no shouting, just silence, the kind that burns deeper than any words. But the real damage wasn't the stolen money. It was the stain on my integrity. So I did what I always did when something broke. I fixed it. I reinstated Sophia. Publicly. At the next board meeting, I addressed the entire room. "I made a mistake," I said. "A serious one. I believed evidence over empathy. But leadership isn't about being right. It's about making things right." The silence was heavy, but when I saw Sophia walk back into the room, head high, I knew I'd rebuilt what mattered most: trust. From that day forward, Torque IQ changed again. We implemented transparent auditing systems, but we also created a new value: accountability with humanity. Every decision, every promotion, every failure, reviewed not just by numbers but by people. Months later, Sophia stopped by my office with 2 cups of coffee. "You know," she said, smiling faintly. You're not as invincible as people think. I laughed. I never wanted to be. She leaned against the doorframe. Then maybe that's why you'll last longer than most. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since the shop days: peace. That night, I drove back to the old repair shop where everything began. The lights were off, the paint was fading, but the walls still smelled of oil and ambition. I sat on the same stool I once used to eat lunch between repairs. The same stool I used to dream from. And I realized success had taken me full circle again. From hands that fix cars to hands that fix companies. From people laughing at my job to people learning from my journey. And yet, deep down, I knew there was still one chapter left. One last test that would decide whether I was a builder or just another businessman. The next few years blurred into a rhythm of airports, boardrooms, and milestones. Torque IQ had become more than a company. It was a movement. Our systems powered fleets in 32 countries, and small garages from Detroit to Delhi now used the same technology once reserved for billion-dollar corporations. I was no longer the man they laughed at for fixing cars. I was the man who had turned fixing into a philosophy. But even as the world praised the company, I felt something quieter tugging at me. The sense that I'd built enough to finally step back. Not to retire, but to reconnect. Point one afternoon, while reviewing the next quarter's projections, my assistant walked in holding a sleek, embossed envelope. It's from Vanguard, she said. The original board. The ones who sold the company to you. Inside was a formal invitation to their annual founders' dinner. At first, I almost laughed. The same group that once mocked me for being too manual now wanted me at their table. But something in me said to go. Not for revenge, for reflection. The dinner was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the kind of place where the chandeliers cost more than my first workshop. When I walked in, all conversation stopped for a moment. Heads turned. The man they'd once ridiculed now wore the suit they used to dream of affording. Aaron was there too, sitting near the back. When our eyes met, he nodded faintly, not in apology, but in acknowledgement. And at the center table sat Robert Haynes, the same CEO who once told me I wasn't corporate material. He rose from his seat as I approached. Ethan Cole, he said warmly, extending his hand. I'm glad you came. I shook it steady and calm. It's been a long time, Mr. Haynes. He smiled, but his eyes carried something heavier than arrogance now. It has, and it seems the years have favored you more than me. Dinner went as these events usually did. Speeches, laughter, polite backpatting. But when dessert arrived, Robert leaned in. I'll be honest, he said quietly. I didn't bring you here for nostalgia. I raised an eyebrow. Then why? He sighed. Our company's been struggling. The market's changing faster than we can adapt. I need Torque IQ support, not as a client this time, but as a partner. It hit me then. The man who once told me to pick one career was now asking for help from the same hands he dismissed. Robert, I said slowly, you once told me I'd never fit in your world. Turns out, I built one of my own. He nodded, a faint smile forming. I was wrong about you. Maybe wrong about what success really looks like. For the first time, I saw humility in his face, and I realized something important. Revenge may close the circle, but forgiveness expands it. A week later, Torque IQ signed a partnership deal with Haynes Logistics. Not a buyout, not a takeover, but a collaboration based on respect. I could have absorbed his company entirely. Instead, I offered equity in training, a bridge instead of trophy. People ask me why. Because, I told them, the point was never to humiliate anyone. It was to prove that dignity and discipline are stronger than pride. That deal became a global case study, empathy in business leadership. And for the first time, I felt proud not of my power, but of my restraint. Months later, I took a trip back home, to the same neighborhood where my first garage once stood. The lot was empty now, the shop long gone, but I parked my car in the same spot and stepped out. The air smelled the same, part fuel, part memory. An old neighbor spotted me. Ethan, that you? I smiled. Yeah, it's been a while. He laughed. Still fixing cars? Always, I said, just on a bigger scale. He shook his head, smiling. You were always different, kid. Never complained, never quit. As I walked away, his words echoed in my mind. Never quit. That was all I'd really done. Just kept moving forward one bolt, one idea, one heartbreak at a time. Months later, I was invited to speak on a global leadership panel. The interviewer, a young woman with bright eyes and sharper questions, asked, "Ethan, if you could go back and change anything, would you?" I paused, thinking. "I wouldn't change the laughter," I said finally. The jokes, the doubt, the rejections, they were all fuel. Because the truth is, every no that he gave me was just the universe's way of saying, "Not yet." She smiled. "So what would you tell the people who laughed at you back then?" I leaned back in my chair, looking straight at the camera. "Thank you," I said. "You made me build something even you couldn't imagine." A year later, Torque IQ celebrated its 10th anniversary. We held the event at the headquarters, a building filled with glass walls, open spaces, and a hum of machines that never stopped improving. On the stage behind me was a projection of the company's first logo, hand-drawn, crooked, made on an old laptop in the back of my garage. I looked out at my team, hundreds of faces, young and old, engineers and dreamers. And I said, they laughed at my job once. They said fixing cars wasn't ambition. But today, every system that moves this world forward was built by someone who refused to stop fixing. Because the truth is, we're all mechanics. Just some of us fix engines, and some of us fix excuses. The room erupted in applause. But what stayed with me wasn't the sound. It was the feeling, the calm certainty that the journey was complete. That night, after the event, I sat in my office alone again. The city glowed outside, and my reflection stared back. Not the man who started with nothing, not the CEO they praised, but the same mechanic who'd never stopped building. On my desk sat two things: a photo of my first shop, faded but sacred, and a small wrench, worn from years of use, that I picked it up and turned in my hand, the metal cool and familiar. That was my real degree, my first business card, my story in steel. I whispered to the empty room. They laughed at my job, but my job became my legacy. And in that quiet moment, I realized something no award could teach me. The loudest victories are the ones that don't need to